Welcome to the Level Set. I am attorney Larry Fields, and I'm joined by the Dr. Charles Alexander. And we have an esoteric topic that we're dealing with today, a topic that I have to have an expert on, and we are blessed to have one that is an interdisciplinary genius. And I will never say that publicly. But we're here with Dr. Alexander, and the topic today we want to deal with are feelings and emotions. And not because this is, one of the shows of male-female relationships that we used to have back on campus at Morehouse and Spelman, but we're dealing with how individuals make their everyday, us included, decisions. We often talk about individuals that are voting against their interests. But today, we're going to explore and go a little deeper into what guides us into that. So, Dr. Alexander, I want to begin with the simple question. What part of the brain do feelings and emotions come from? Or is there a, discrete area that comes from? But we can tell you, I know you can tell me, and you've told me a million times where my executive making functions come from, where my ability to of dexterity can come from. But what about feelings and emotions?
Good morning, Attorney Fields.
Good morning, Doc.
Um, and so we've talked about this before, and kind of the short answer leads us to the long answer, right? And so the short answer is that, what we always have to be thinking about is that our brain has all of these interconnected spaces, right? And all of these interconnected networks. And so, um, so if I were to pivot, I'm a guess, just kind of just based on neuroanatomy. So there's this part called the amygdala, and we've talked about the amygdala before. We've talked about the amygdala.
Near the
When,
temple. It's near the temple.
it's probably like right in this area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
temporal
It's
lobe
probably,
then.
yeah. And so it's a little, and then a little further back. So it's probably, and so amygdala processes it kind of it helps in the process of emotions. Let's say that. I think that's a better way to say it. And so like it gets information from other sensory spaces, and then it gives us an idea about what's going on, you know.
Let me ask you
Then-
this, Doc. Now, isn't
Mhm.
that where fear comes from?
And so that's really kind of that's ultimately where it is kind of like that because it's a part of our fight or flight reflex, right? And so we've talked about hypothalamic um pituitary adrenal axis, right? So we've talked about that, and in the process of us um figuring out our response to whatever's going on in our environment. You have that HPA system, and you have our, you know, front brain. So this is our prefrontal cortex. And, you have our hypothalamus and, well, I just mentioned the hypothalamus, but we have the amygdala and we have also the hippocampus, which is necessary for, our memory processing. So you have all of these units working together. And And so our emotions become a combination of um, our our memories, our um, the the range of things that are um, I guess so. I don't even know if it's right to call them emotions, but in as much as the range of values that are kind of that exist within um in the amygdala, so it ends up being like this combination of of things. But that's the general, back to your question, that's kind of the general area where all of this is going on from here to like here, that um it's all going on around in here, and but again, it's it's informed from our larger peripheral nervous system where we have all of our sensory pieces. And so it's coming from our the tactile experiences and of sorts that we get from our extremities. It's coming from you know from our eyes. It's coming from our nose. So all of our senses have a part in how we are receiving and encoding and processing information, and then a combination of, you know, thoughts and memories, and again, where we end up on this continuum that probably exists in or near the amygdala about whether this is good, bad, or indifferent, that ultimately we come to the sense that this is happy, or I should be fearful, or I should be angry, or whatever those things are in between.
So is it safe to say that the basis for happiness, if and the basis for joy come in the absence of fear?
I would say that that's probably a fair thought. um yeah, that so fear is uh it's kind of like our core emotional and attached to our survival, and to the survival instinct. And so if we are at a space where um, our fundamental thought is survival, and there is there is a fear or a reasonable threat that our being is at risk, then you could there's really only two things you could do at that space, and that's either the fight or the flee. So you're either going to have the fear or the anger, so the anger necessary to ward off the threat, or the fear necessary to flee, right? And then you can be totally overwhelmed, and you know and you can have that freeze or faint, or however different ways that people have come to start to explain that.
So emotions and feelings are also vital for survival then.
Yes, because you need a range of motions. And so really you gotta think about it um at in terms of the initial, the primary attachment. And the primary attachment is that of mother and child, and then child with other caregivers. And so, those fundamental emotions, come with that attachment, that ability to move toward, that ability um, to seek comfort and receive comfort. Now, some of that is, mediated. at a chemical level, so we have this chemical called oxytocin, and oxytocin helps bonding. It facilitates bonding.
And where is that generated in the brain, Doc?
That I'm not necessarily sure, but we can find that. That's not
Yeah,
hard.
that's not hard at all. No, we can find that out. So, as it relates to politics, and we'll use that as a general term, how do these emotions uh, intertwine with the decisions that we make in politics? Or what's the most, and the easiest way to be uh, fashioned, as opposed to, I want to use the word manipulated, but fashioned.
And so it would be a combination of all of these places that we've just talked about. It'd be a combination of, what's going on, with the HPA axis and what's going on in the frontal lobe. So in the frontal lobe, again, that's all that is up here. Um that's that's where our executive functioning occurs. And and so that's planning and executing. Um, that is, our ability to, it's called inhibition. And inhibition kind of basically means the ability to manage impulsive responses. Um, and so this is generally where it's going on. And then we have a we the the frontal lobe in and of itself, different areas of it have different functions and responsibilities. And so if we talk about the dorsal the dorsal prefrontal lobe, then that would kind of be what we would consider kind of the top part. And then we have the ventral,
The part
which
where,
would
where,
kind of
where
be
football players ram into each other.
the yes. And that's why we, and that's why I think about the long-term impacts of football, primarily that, because the most vulnerable spot, of your brain is that first point of contact in that thing we call football, right? And so this would kind of be dorsal, and then this would kind of be ventral, right? And so in the dorsal space, um, this is more kind of things are more kind of cut and dry. So that's probably the space of rules and laws and policy, right? And then this space is
Up under the
probably
eye. Up,
so yeah, so it's so that's kind of the bottom or the yeah, so let's call it, yeah, the bottom of the frontal lobe. That would be the ventral prefrontal lobe, and it's down in that area where we start to get more of the evaluative thought that is probably influenced by, emotions and things of that nature, and so yeah, and so you have this coming together of all of these different parts, and that's the important thing always to kind of remember is that um for a number of different reasons. And one was, not nefarious at all. Um, is that we've collectively, not just Black folks, but we've collectively been misinformed about what the brain does. And I'm gonna say like 70% of that is because we didn't know. Brain science is ever
evolve.
expanding. Yeah. And so a lot of this, so like, we've been talking about for the past, month or maybe a little more than a month, we've been talking about the the default mode network. Well, in the science, that's probably about 10 to 15 years old. That's not a new, I mean, that's a new concept. And so um, you know, there are things that we've known for years and years and years, but there are other things that we're just coming to kind of realize. And so um the functionality and of differing brain regions and brain structures is that the understanding of that is increasing, you know, daily. Um, and, and so one of the things I do is diagnostic testing and neuropsychological testing. And so like, you know, our ability to kind of, to understand, what particular, neurons are firing in different regions of the brain is increasing over and over and over. And um now we have a better we're gaining a better understanding of this supercomputer that we call the brain every day.
That is that is just fascinating in its own right. It's got to be an exciting time to be in your field. Because I mean, you
If you
mentioned
want to do this,
if
that's it's an exciting time in the field if if you're not intimidated by neuroscience. And so the issue is that much of psychology has really just been theory based, right? And so much of what I learned, so I finished my doctorate in 98. And so much of what I learned between um starting grad school in 91 and and then finishing in 98, much of what I learned in that space is it's outdated. Um because very little of it was really predicated on brain science. I would say that the only thing that has in terms of a core or anchor principle, the only thing that has really remained is the fight or flight response. And, but our thoughts on that have evolved, and all of the science around that has evolved tremendously, in the past 20 years as well.
so, borrowing a question from the Mike Jones, what, as you look back, what stands out the most that we absolutely thought was true back then that was absolutely wrong, that we would,
Well,
you know,
well, like so one of the things that people were saying, and this was psychologists and lay people alike. I mean, you might hear this anywhere. Um, people were saying like, we only use 10% of the brain. You know,
right,
people were
right.
saying that, right? And it's like, I mean, I once I got into the space, I knew that wasn't true. But the issue was that there was still people who really believed that was true. But like all you needed, which most people don't get for whatever reason, how our educational system is set up was, just not some higher order class in neuroscience, but just basic anatomy, like just a basic anatomy class. And um and in that basic anatomy class, just learning about the lobes, so learning that, frontal lobe is for reasoning and occipital lobe is place for vision. And then you have the temporal and the parietal lobe. And the temporal lobe think that's where your auditory kind um cortex is, and your parietal lobe is kind of where your some of your motor and functions are, something to that degree. And so um that in and of itself tells you that's that can't be 10% of brain. You know what I'm saying? Like just
Correct.
knowing, just yeah,
Right.
just and so it's just this huge system that at all times is functioning is causing everything to function. Um, or I guess one of the messages that continues is this thought that your heart is literally where emotions are,
Wow.
you know. But
Wow.
but we have annual reinforcement for that. It's called Valentine's Day, right? And so, but even in sports, we be like, oh, he ain't got no heart, and but all of that is happening here,
Wow. In
you
the
know.
brain.
Yeah,
In the
yeah, yeah.
brain. So let me
And
ask you this, Doc. Based on what you just described, and if I vote against a person that wants to provide me health care, or I vote for a person that shows up every other year or every 4 years and sells me on hope and no results, and I continue to buy, what aspect of the brain am I allowed to rule? Am I allowing to rule?
I mean, all of that decision making is occurring again in in the frontal cortex. So the issue is um what kind of information it, does the individual have available. Um, so one of the things that we know about um and we've known this for a long time. One of the things that we know about um this dichotomy that we have in the United States is that what we call the base of the the Republican Party, that's a low information people, right? So we know that. Um, and then we know when we look at how voting maps, you know, urban areas and or and virtually anywhere that there is a university, it's typically blue, right? And and so and typically what you have in those urban centers, those metropolitan, well, I guess it's yeah. So in those metropolitan centers, the access to information in the most general sense is greater typically than what it is in rural areas. So in those rural areas, we have low information, typically low information folks, and in metropolitan areas, we have um, typically better informed folks, and there's probably um, some major academic institutions, and again we're like so for the state of Missouri, I would guess that even if even if Columbia, let's say, which is pretty centrally located, I'd imagine even if the city of Columbia, continues to vote Republican, that relative to the rest of the area, Columbia is more blue. You know what I'm saying? And that's because there's a highly informed core attached to the University of Missouri. There's a and probably wherever there are is exchange. So it probably looks the same if we are in Rolla. It probably looks the same, definitely looks the same at UMKC because that metropolitan area is kind of solidly blue, right? Looks the same around UMSL because St. Louis is pretty solidly blue because there's this high piece. And so and why that is important is because again, so on this dorsal part, we're talking about laws and rules, and policies, but we're also talking about facts. And so that's the dorsal part. But your ability to manage facts is, helped or hindered by the quality of information. And so, um, my thought would be is that that person who appears to be voting, counter their, their interests is maybe we don't know the facts. Maybe we don't know the facts upon which, they're doing, they're making their decisions or what's tied to their decisions, right? Now, so in this space, in that ventral space, that um, so what goes into the evaluative process? So in this, in that ventral space is more subjective, right? So what are the things that go into that, right? Um, and so between these two spaces, where we'd have to know what 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 kind of fuels that, right? Now, in that ventral space, that person is probably a little more likely to be in touch with what's going on in the fight or flight space, just because that's that's we know that there is an amount of information that's coming um, from the HPA axis into the ventral into that ventral space, and so in this conversation, um, we know that there is amount of fear that that causes um, a person to do what we believe is to vote outside, to vote counter to, his or her um, best interest. But again, we got to know what facts that person is, what facts is that person basing their thoughts on? And so if that person's vote is really going to be about how how they believe um, the distribution of resources impacts them, and they've been told that, if this group over here gets any access, then that's it for you. Then, you know, literally this is an existential, voting becomes the existential threat for them, right? And so they literally vote counter to their, what we perceive to be counter to their interests. But if if in this context they see their interests as being part of who they perceive to be the dominant group, regardless of what the results are, that is their interest. But that's predicated on a history, right? And so in pre-production, we kind of talk about how, kind of how mental health kind of rolls and fits into this larger system. One of the ways that it fits in that we don't always talk about as such is, eugenics and the thought of us being inferior, and part of the justification of slavery being that, you know, the on a core basis of this inferiority notion is that, we are simple-minded. And we are simple-minded because we got smaller brains, and we got smaller brains because we got smaller heads. I'm like, there's a whole science around that was used to justify slavery. And um and so, one of the vestiges of that is that, we're, so the racism that stems, that so there's this cyclical kind of piece, or at least a bidirectional arrow, you got racism and you got eugenics. First you had racism, then you had, so first it was a linear piece, you had racism and then eugenics, and now it's bidirectional, right? So now it's all of this kind of stuff. Um, but you end up with fundamentally just this racist thought, right? And this racist thought, you know, all of the things that come with that: separation, oppression, blah 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 blah. Um, at one point, in the colonial era of this thing, um, you had these, you had just regular old poor white folks, and you had white indentures, and then you had the native population, and you had um probably literally three or four black indentures prior to um prior to that, 20 and odd cargo that they purchased, that, depending on the source, they're still lying about, in terms of the the leaders of the colonies understanding, or whether they were dealing with enslaved captives or not. They actually bought them. I mean, there is an actual document I was that references, you know the the um the exchange. But again, they knew what they were purchasing when they were purchasing. And so over time, this thing goes from, in terms of black folks, this thing goes from um indenture to, some nominal freedom, and like and 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 with an adjacent enslaved population, I said, and then as we go further, I think like the 1660s or 1670s, as we're getting into that space, they're steadily taking away the freedoms of, you know, the free um the free African society that existed. Well, somewhere in that space, I don't know the exact years, there was this thing called the Bacon's Rebellion, right? And in the Bacon's Rebellion, you had, marginalized white folks, black folks, free and enslaved, and the indigenous population ultimately kind of come together to go against the folks who had means, you know. And so once that occurred, the reasoning coming out of that was for the haves was, we gotta we gotta make it so the white have-nots understand it's not in their interest to collaborate with free or enslaved Africans or the indigenous population. And so at that point, the thing got to be not whether or not you got money, is are you white or other? And so there's a so how many years is that there? That's 400 years. So
That's 400 years. Yes,
we
sir.
got so 400 years of is better to be white than to have economic and social equity. If the fight for social and economic equity means that you align with other, right? So if you got to choose between alignment with other to better ensure your you know equity in this thing, it's far better to be white and disenfranchised than to align with the inferior other, right?
Because you're better than them at
Because
any.
you're better than them fundamentally. And
So you have
so
this two-prong attack. I have to bastardize black folks, and I have to elevate whiteness at the
yes,
same time.
yes.
So
And
the
so
eugenics meets white superiority.
so then you have the eugenics movement to justify white superiority from a medical and scientific basis, right? And so you fast forward to now, and we're talking about so what's going on in the frontal lobe. Well, if I mean it's like any other computer, garbage in, garbage out. And so if that is the information that these two processes are utilizing to arrive at a decision, then that's just where they're going to end up. So you still have all of the formal processing going on, and and the dorsal prefrontal cortex. So that's the objective data, right? So that's us all looking at the same thing. We all looking at the same policy and procedures and law. We all looking at that same thing. So the facts in and of themselves are the same. Here we have the influence of um our our emotional interpretation of history and current thing, everything else is at this level. And so if if this is what, because like when we were talking about the African self, remember? And so there's this piece, the the Sassoon, which is the ancestral knowledge, the ancestral wisdom, right? So in theory, if those are the components of the self, then white folks got it too. So they got a ancestral knowledge too. Their ancestral knowledge is racist. And so their ancestral knowledge is telling them that fundamentally you white and you gonna vote in the interest of white, even though that's not in your, that like they don't even get to the even though that's not in your general interest, in your individual interest. That's not how that works for them in the main. It is this is this is better than that.
So
And they have a history to suggest that you know is true at a in the aggregate, they don't because of the impact of misinformation on them. They don't process it well as it relates at the individual basis.
And so that's backed up in law and politics and in health.
Yes,
So and not only does that benefit or actually speak to white folks, but it speaks to every other nationality. The,
yes. And it
and
speaks to us too. Like, and
it's
so like we
Hispanics
don't
too.
understand. Yes, yes, yes,
And
yes.
so we now, if I go to divinity school, a white divinity school, and I am taught this doctrine that the highest of being is white, and I buy into that, as many of our domesticated individual, domesticated brothers and sisters, as well as our African brothers and sisters, have we come back spewing a a self-harming venom that is foreign to our community.
Yes. And so, and that's the person that um Carter G. Woodson was talking about.
That is
You
correct.
know,
Yeah.
you know, that white universities ruin us, right? We don't understand it as such, but that's kind of thing. Some of us don't understand it as such. Now, I mean, again, now the fact of the matter is, um, you know, we have to we have to engage with the larger system in order to be able to get whatever there is to get in this thing. So that's the facts of the matter. The issue is, can we get the foundational, can we have, do we have a means of stress inoculation? Right? So do we have a means that at just a fundamental level of equipping our young people, of equipping ourselves, of getting our annual inoculation so that we can manage this onslaught, so that as we send young folks and as we ourselves continue to engage in this thing, that we're steadily that we're doing so fortified with the right information so that we're less vulnerable, to all of these things. Right.
You remind me of Frantz Fanon when he was talking about the Algerians in the face of the brainwashing of the French, and how the only thing they had to rely on was their own self internal will, absent any any historical references, any broadcast references, any historical book references. So often in these environments of miseducation or no education, we're naked.
Yes.
I'll share this with you. The blacks in Sierra Leone talked about foreign culture creating these polyphemus, and they use the Latin term cui lumen adsumption, which means thou who the light has been taken from and are sightless.
Yeah. And all of these groups, so so if you go back to the continent um and you you research some of the documentation of things that have been passed down from generation to generation in terms of people, of the various, indigenous groups there and their initial interactions um, with the Europeans and the Arabs. You find that there, there were these, comparative analysis in terms of, how that group related versus, how the indigenous group related. Um, and you can, but you can get a sense of kind of, how things occurred, and and how we ultimately end up in this space. But in all of this, what's necessary, and much the same way that I was talking about it in terms of psychology, we have to start having conversations and revisiting all of these things from the emerging field, the ever emerging field, the ever developing field of neuroscience, and understanding how we've made decisions and how we continue to make decisions. And and that interaction between um our neurophysiology and the environment, right? And just how that um how that interaction has determined things. And so again, so if we get back to just at a basic level, okay, so we got um the just the more literal side, and then we got the more kind of the side that's a little more um you know it's dealing a little more with the affective side, let's say. um
Mean by that,
and that again, so with the ventrolateral side, it's I have to take a look and see if it's actually innervated, meaning that is actually where our where we're connected. Like, do we have connection? Is there connectivity between, um, so like, where is there actual connectivity from the HPA axis to the frontal lobe? And is that the space? Is the ventral um uh frontal cortex, is that the actual space? So, which again, it's not a hard answer to find. So like oxytocin is produced in the hypothalamus. So we got that answer uh, from our earlier question. Um, so let's see. But but my point is, like, we have to understand that all of these aren't just random occurrences in terms of
how we
like
do
how the stuff.
anything. Why do
Yes,
I like
yes,
the color of,
yes.
black? Why do I, why does, yeah, why is chicken the high order of taste in food to me? Who gave that to me? Why do I say it tastes just like chicken? And I mean that as a compliment. So I mean, so I mean, where did these things come from? Why do I like certain fabrics? Yeah, what resonates to me about this neighborhood? Why do I write in this fashion? And I find that, all of these things we, have to be approached with a level of curiosity to find out what is making us tick. But before we get away from you, I did a disservice to everyone listening because you were talking about stress inoculation and I interrupted you.
Hmm.
If we could go back to some of those things, Doc, and talk about that, and then pick up where we are back on this preference piece. What are some of these? How can I be inoculated against some of this stress?
I mean, again, it's like, and I mean, it's not the inoculate. I mean, it's so we had to think about this stuff. So inoculation, it's the same thing as taking a flu shot, right? And so and so when we're talking about stress inoculation, it is. A, identifying what the stressors are, and then B, making sure that we have the tools and the knowledge necessary to, to confront the and to confront and eliminate or at least decrease the stressor. And so we were talking about voting kind of to start with. And um so it's necessary. So for us, it's necessary to kind of understand this whole thing centered around voting, historically, you know, well, historically, so that we understand, what's going on now. So to understand that it, voting started, whenever they started voting, sometime, in the 1600s, that it was for, propertied white men. That's it. So we got to start there. And so then, and it stayed that way, right? Some point, propertied black men were, uh, able to vote on in certain situations. And I'd imagine for any other, anybody else that was deemed other, it was probably the same. And so there were, and that was probably kind of regional. That kind of probably depended on what colony that you were in. But so we have to start kind of in those spaces. And and then even though there were times in which we had some nominal participation um in, our yeah, just that, some nominal participation in the executive branch, pre and post uh Revolutionary War. Um, it was really just that. It was nominal, right? And but ultimately it's not until the 15th Amendment, which is post Civil War, that, Black folks are able to vote, right? And then I think it's what is it, the 19th Amendment that gives women the right to vote.
That is
And
correct, sir.
and so then even with the 19th Amendment, um, Black women still aren't allowed to vote, you know, en masse. So it's probably a very, nominal amount of Black women who are allowed to vote, and so that's how we get all the way into um into the 60s and into the Voting Rights Act. And now we can vote. Many of us we don't really attach voting. So, A, we don't know just a basic and fundamental history of voting and what resulted in our access to voting in math. So, A, most of us don't know that. B, we don't understand how access to resources at a local level are related to voting, right? C, we don't understand the differing levels of government that relate, you know, that are influenced by our voting that result in our access to um to whatever the requisite services are. So we don't know the difference necessarily between having to vote, in our municipal election versus the city, the larger, city or county election versus the state versus the feds. And we don't know who funds what, right? So to understand that at its most basic level would be a form of stress inoculation. Right? It, and so like it seems like this huge complex undertaking, but it really isn't. because all it really takes is just a understanding of, you know, of the context and why there's voting, what the voting's for, and who you're voting for when you vote at this time of the year versus that time of the year, that kind of thing. Who does what. So, and so like in terms of this conversation, the best stress inoculation always is accurate information.
So let me ask you what you feel about the colloquialism that says, if you can name it, you can tame it when it relates to mental health in terms of anxiety. If you can name the fact that this thing is a stress or a trigger, and that it causes you some discomfort, you can possibly tame it.
That's definitely a starting point, right? And so the issue, because the issue in that the issue there is really a literacy issue. And so another form of inoculation um
I love that
is
term. I
is
absolutely
to,
love that term.
is to have the act, is to have the literacy, to have the mental health literacy, right? You know, and like many of us, like it's rare that um it's very rare that of all of the things that I hear Black people say, um, in the mental health space, the word anxiety is probably um yeah, it's not it's one of the least likely words that I'm going to hear.
Really?
So like yeah, so like we respond highly to pop psychology. Well, I will say that. And so what the words that we use, um so first of all, I'll use the word that we've historically used wrong.
Schizophrenia.
Yes. And um so we've long kind of bought into this thing that schizophrenia
It's
is is
bipolar.
is a well, before we even confused it with bipolar, we confused it with personality disorder. And so we kind of described it in a bipolar, you know, kind of way,
And
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 I'm like, you can find, lectures by Dr. King in which Dr. King is using,
incorrect.
schizophrenia kind
Yeah.
of, yeah,
He
and this
called
and
America schizophrenic.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
is, but that wasn't the proper
But that's
diagnosis.
not the pro yeah, that's not,
He was
and I
he,
don't even think it was and then, and X number of times we got to make sure that we're even, giving him credit for how the word was used at the time, but I don't think it was used at the time in that manner,
uh,
right? And so I think he was using the word wrong, period. But
let's
you
see.
still have people say that like it has not been that long ago that I heard somebody speak it in that way. And so uh so you have that. But like, so we use bipolar, we use depression, just in terms of, our use of mental health diagnosis. We use ADHD, but and we use PTSD, right? Everybody got PTSD. And but it's rare that I hear people use the word anxiety, and it's almost never am I talking to a layperson that understands that anxiety and PTSD exist on the same continuum, right? And so again, having this, having these kind of conversations and learning about, um, learning about this terminology, this is another level of, again, this is stress inoculation too. Um, but like it's in short, just learning about, you know, who you need to ask for what in your community. That's stress inoculation. To know, to understand what your needs are and understand how to get them met and what resources are available to you to have those needs met, that is stress inoculation. Right. And so, yeah, that's that's kind of it in that space. It's not a huge, certainly there's, you know, some white folks came up with the phrase, and so we attach more to it than, than what it is and ultimately what it means. Um, but that's really all it is. And so it's learning about stuff. And then once you learn about stuff, how do you manage it? So, okay, so now let's learn a little. So how do I manage my initial anxiety? Okay, well, once you realize that you're actually in a safe space and that no harm is about no that you reasonably come to the conclusion that no harm is about to, befall you, then you could just sit up straight in your chair and breathe from your stomach. It's called diaphragmatic breathing. So you're breathing from this area right here, and that's going to calm you down, right? And that's going to slow your heart rate. It's literally going to tell your body that the threat has been averted, and you're going to relax, right? Um, you know. And so then there's this whole other range of things that really just cause people more anxiety because you could do box breathing, you could like it's like all of these different things. And then folks start being concerned about, do I know how to do this right? Kind of like meditation. Oh, I would do meditation, but I don't know how to do it. Turn off the TV, turn off the radio, turn, put all your devices over there and just kind of sit in silence and think. Well, how long? However long you can do it. If you could do it for a minute, do it for a minute. If you could do it more, do it as much as you reasonably can, as frequently as you reasonably can. Sometimes I like to do it. My favorite place I like to do it is like I could drive, man, I could drive hours in silence and just think and just let the thoughts flow. And so it's all of these kind of things, and I don't know if this is a us thing that is secondary, um, again, to, um, I mean, like, probably don't need to overthink it. It probably is. This is just secondary to, again, 400 years of oppression is that, we have a level of concern and angst and cynicism about everything. It's like, I ain't doing that. But some of the stuff, like we can't get sidetracked by the title of it and things of that nature. We just, you know, these things they're really just that. They're most of these things, and I'm talking about the stuff that exists in the health world, um, mental health specifically, but in the larger health world. These are the phrases and the terminology is just, it's just what they use to describe or whatever. It's kind of like when we was on the when we was on the network and the brother was like, you're using all these words, all these big words. And I was just using brain anatomy, right?
Oh man, yeah.
And so, but no, but this is a thing. That's what I'm saying. It's like, so that impacts our willingness at a very fundamental level to get care. Because like we don't know how to say it. And so when you get back to your point, if you can name it, you can tame it. Like we gotta have just basic understanding of our body and then be able to say, so in my space, the thing is to be able to say what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling. You can't go to the you can't go to a prescribe to a mental health professional and be like, I be tweaking, right? That can't be your description right now.
Culturally
I'm
competent one like you know what
I'm
it
I,
means.
I'm going to try to figure it
You
out.
you know what
I'm
it
gonna try,
means.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but and so that's a whole nother conversation. Do we
Yeah.
have cultural
Yeah.
competency? But this is easy. If we don't have enough psychologists, we can't possibly have enough
That
culturally
is correct.
competent psychologists,
That is
right?
correct.
So that,
And, and,
you know,
and good luck booking you.
and good luck,
Luck.
and so, um, so, but all of those things, they are the simple things, and those are the things that that inoculation is made of. Is getting in this space is not getting a shot. It's getting the right information necessary to ward off misinformation and disinformation, right? So the misinformation is, you know, the misinformation is schizophrenia is a personality disorder. That's misinformation,
And,
right?
and that is an
You know, right.
underrepresentation. Schizophrenia is
The the
horrible.
dis the disinformation is that um black folks are overly vulnerable to schizophrenia, right? And um and so or yeah, well, we'll leave it at that. But we got to have information so that we can correct misinformation and we can confront disinformation, right? And we we got to have just kind of like these regular kind of conversations that then kind of help people to to kind of figure out A, why they do what they do, and then B, have a better sense of why the people around them or the larger population that they're observing, why they do what they do, right? Because I do think we spend an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out why poor white folks vote against, you know, Medicare expansion. We spend too much time on that. They do that because they're white supremacists. That's it. That's the answer. And so and that so the thing becomes, what are we going to do? Ultimately, that's where this goes.
To go.
Why would women vote for laws that curb women's health care? Because they white supremacists. Boom, done. Next. We spend too much time trying to figure that stuff out.
Why do we
Um,
continue not to hold our politicians accountable and and leaving our status quo subservient?
and so that gets back to, we have to do a better job of the education process that centers around civics. We don't understand why we vote. We don't. We don't understand the power of the vote. We don't understand all that. And so we only we and we have to also consider that there's a priming effect. So if we got hundreds of years of black folks getting lynched for the contemplation of voting, and that there exists an ancestral knowledge or wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in there it has to be plausible that at best we paused at the thought of voting.
That is correct.
Right,
Epigenetically,
right,
and
right,
consciously.
right. So we pause at best there's a pause. And so So some of us after the pause say we're gonna do this regardless. And so just think about the number of times in the ascension of Barack Obama that you heard you heard either in present company conversations, or you saw something you were reading, or you heard an interview on TV or on the radio where you heard a elder say, I just hope he don't get hurt.
Oh, a million
Right?
times,
Right?
a million times.
That that's that that's that recollection of this is what they kill black leaders. We know this, right? And so if this joker gonna run for president, he gonna get killed. I don't want him to get killed, right? And so there were different segments of our community who did not want him to run, not because they didn't want a black president, but they didn't think having a black president was worth seeing that guy get killed, right? Then we have folks who wanted him around but were fearful that he was going to get killed, right? And then we had those folks who didn't want him to run because it's like a nigga can't be president, right? This is all within our community, right? And then we got that segment of folks who's like, I ain't voting no way. Then you had that segment of folks that was like, I'm not what in that I ain't voting no way segment, you had a segment that wasn't voting because A, he not the descendant of a slave, and B, white folks ain't gonna let us do nothing no way. I mean, so you got all of these different segments, right? I could give you a reasonable neurophysiological reason why this stuff looks the way it looks, right? We don't use it like that. We don't use now. When I say we, I'm talking about our our population in mass at whatever level, wherever we are. You know, um, we don't use psychology or neuropsychology like we don't use it like that. And some of these consulting, like there there is a discipline, political psychology. There is a discipline, economics. Like these, there are disciplines in which other folks are using this science because ultimately it's about what? It's about behavior. And
Jury
if you
consultants.
and so if you understand behavior, just go back to your statement. If you can name it, you can tame it. If you understand behavior, then you can manage behavior and you can do things in a way that allow you to predict behavior, right? And so, but and again, I know we ain't just happen to get here, but we are here nonetheless. And, and we're still very ambivalent about this stuff. And so it impacts our willingness and our ability to use it. And um and so like in the academic space, um I still have I have I had a clinician the other day. Clinician called me for a consult, and he was like, you know the kid's primary care physician is gonna say he got ADHD, and then gonna refer him for a psychology, gonna refer him for a psychological. Like, why would he do that? And I was like, why would he do what? Why would he just say that the kid got a diagnosis? I said, you just said that he referred him for a psychological. He said he did, but why he ain't do that first? I was just like, okay, calm down, brother. I was like,
Everybody calm down.
I was like, that's actually a good thing. I was like, in most cases, the kids got to have a diagnosis for us to unlock any resources otherwise, right? The fact that he made the diagnosis and then sent the kid for or referred the kid for a psychological evaluation means that he needs confirmation about his own clinical judgment. That's a good thing, right? Now, I'm clear on how we arrive in these spaces. I'm saying we just got to work hard to do better in the spaces. So I know that there is a history of us getting treated of how so I'm not questioning how we got here. I'm bringing light to the cost of remaining here, right? Because we do things to stay in this space, right? So we'll take our son to, son or daughter will actually end up for some reason or another, whether it's under, how we got there ain't always, the issue, just that we get there. So we get there. So that's a good thing. They had a conversation. They say it's ADHD. Then the kid gets prescribed medication. At some point, this parent is talking to a brother, a sister, a cousin, a neighbor. They done got my son on. No, 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 that's not what happened. You signed the consent. You said it was okay for them to medicate your child. And I'm not saying it's a problem with your child being medicated. I'm saying once you say yes to your child being medicated for the diagnosis that they gave after you described how your child behaves, own that. And then let's make sure that we're getting appropriate care. I still get too many times folks in front of me, and this ain't, you know, this not a class thing. This is up and down the piece. I still get too many folks in front of me blaming the system for the diagnosis and the prescription you have agency. You're the parent, right? And so, um, and again, some of this, like, you got to be careful on the internet. But like, if you go, if you're in St. Louis, you know, um, if just go to the WashU website. That's a safe space. Go to the WashU website. I'm sure you could find things on mental health at the WashU website. I'm sure you could find things on mental health at, you know, Barnes Hospital website. They probably got a Barnes Hospital WashU joint website or something like that. I'm sure you can find the same if you go to, University of Missouri. It's like just finding right sources. The St. Louis um, Department of Public Health. Go there. I'm sure you can find right information. The Missouri Department of Public Health. I'm sure you can find right information. And there you can find, kind of the right ways to do whatever. Now, once you get done with that, then you get engaged in the more arduous task of finding the competent clinician. But first, you want that name it, tame it piece. So the first step in the name it, tame it is to name it. And so in order to be able to name it, you gotta go to right sources. And so that would be my thing, departments of public health, WashU, St. Louis U, UMSL, um, and get as much information from those spaces as possible relative to what you think you might be looking at. And then once you're equipped with that, you start trying to find a clinician. But in those sites, it could be helpful with you finding a clinician also. Um, but that's kind of how it starts because you got to be able to name it.
What an awesome show. Now, this took such a wonderful uh, intellectual turn. Yeah, I initially thought that we would be able to show that emotions were running these decisions, but these decisions have been calcified, and they are
Yeah, I mean,
coming
and again, like
directly.
that decision, like all of that stuff, we have to think about it in terms of um like so these things exist at a level. So like so Young, Carl Jung, he's a European um psychologist, psychiatrist or whatever. And so he studied under Freud and so he so for him his thing was the collective unconscious. It kind of exists synonymous with the Akan thought of the ancestral self. And really is and so they're but this is this is consistent with what epigenetics tells us, right? That somewhere in the mind and body is a reservoir of all that a particular line has experienced, right? And so, um,
That's a whole show right there because we've been cut off from that.
well,
I, I,
we haven't been cut off from it in as
no,
much
no,
as
I
we
mean in a
don't know
cognitive.
necessarily how to plug into it.
What I mean is we have. You mentioned earlier about some of the miseducation, but that's one of the things that through Western religion has been deemed as uh almost it's not just been deemed, but it has been criticized through Western religion's own superstitions. I think through Africana, and I think through if you look at Haitians, we often label those things under the umbrella of voodoo, and
Hmm.
and voodoo is a bad thing. We don't even know what voodoo is.
Right. Yeah. And so our understanding and appreciation of traditional African belief systems is neo. Like we don't and so we kind of start with this other thing. And from a conceptual basis, uh if you study if if a person took the time to do some comparative study, like I told you, like I studied the Akan, and so the Akan they have a system that you know breaks off into pieces that could um be considered like a typology for a trinity. We know in Kemet is probably the first space where there was a concept of the Trinity, right? And so we don't in our unwilling, because at this point this isn't a at this point this is a want to,
This is a
right?
learned thing that we do.
Right. So at this
Self-help is
point, we could anybody anybody who got a moment and access to a library or the internet at home or internet wherever could study, traditional African religion if they wanted to. This is a want to thing.
I'm gonna,
Ain't nobody keeping you from doing it. And
I'm gonna
so,
give you three. I'm gonna give you three recommendations right now. The first is African Medicine by Finch. I don't know why, yeah, by Charles S. Finch, who's an MD that goes and references everything that you just talked about. You don't have to stop there. You can cross-check that with Stolen Legacies. These are all in my present rotation. And I'm also studying Blyden, Christianity, Islam, and the Negro race. These are all three that get direct, well, not the economy. I'm going to have to look at that, but you just mentioned it. These are in my, these are in my bag right now.
mhm.
So, I mean, along with, I might as well say it too, how to eat to live.
Mhm.
Elijah. So, I mean, we don't have any excuse.
Yeah, and
Uh,
so yeah,
if you're in
so the
St.
thing,
Louis, Progressive Bookstore has all of those.
and so so the thing is like how, and so this is how we, and this is where we had to get then into like the again the default mode network and the theory of mind. Like you do have to be able to quiet that thing around you, right? Um, so we are, so like we are, so so I heard this brother say, I was at a lecture at the at the Comedic Institute. I don't know if this was his or if he borrowed it from another nationalist. He was like, it really kind of comes down to what manner of slave, right? And so we're all oppressed. It looks different, right? Depending on who you are and, what you've been able to do or whatever, what kind of breaks you got, blah, 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 blah. So I know that, so like I don't have that book by Blyden, but I got some Blyden, and I don't have that book by Finch, but I got some Finch, and I got some honorable. I mean, so like I got a library, you got a library. Anybody can have a library. Then we're just talking about the size of the library. And if you ain't got a library, you only need one book to have a library.
That is
So
a
go
library, sir.
go get that book,
And even
right?
if you
Don't
color that one, it's still a library. No.
right? It's like go get that book. Create a virtual library. I mean, so the thing is to get started, right? But you got to create that time and that space that you could actually commune with that book, that you could spend time with that book. So if it's gonna be you know, if it's gonna be the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, let's say, then you got to spend time to figure out when you're gonna commune with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, because that's literally what you're doing when you're studying that book,
That's
right?
true.
And so we
True.
just gotta find time, and you can do this, and you could do it, if you've already found time, again, and this is for the person who feels that this is somehow kind of, you know sacrilegious because only thing I'm gonna read about is the Bible. Well, read it in tandem with your Bible and find out where those things converge and where they are opposing. The piece is, are you able to come up with the so like with that book in particular for by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that's like a prescription, right? That's how to eat to live. That's like a prescription. So the issue
You know
is,
how I'm reading that book, Doc? That's a love story.
and so the thing
Somebody
is like,
loves you.
so
Tell me
how
this.
do you come up with, how do you love yourself? That's
That,
that's
that,
that's actually what I was getting at. Like,
well,
how do you come up with your prescription? How do you come up with whatever? But that's how this starts,
I'm gonna tell you
is
why I think
you
it's a
got to
love
get you a
story,
good
Doc.
source.
I'm gonna tell you why. When somebody thinks so much of you that they want to show you what to put in your body and not to put in painstaking detail in the face of all that criticism, that is a person, I don't care what their religion is, they have genuine love for you. Because this man has told me that food is medicine.
Hmm.
And I just don't think that there is a bigger declaration of love than that.
And that's how we got to think it. And so, but we got to be willing to even read the stuff, right? To even be able to get to a point where, you know, like, so somebody's going to be privy to this conversation, and then, they'll be like, well, I don't care what they say, blah, 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 blah. You at least got to be willing to explore, right? You at least got to be willing, I ain't going. So whole other thing. I don't want to get too this. Like we won't read the Honorable Elijah Muhammad because we believe that Islam is proffering the Prophet Muhammad versus Jesus. Right. So too many of us believe that.
We
Right.
don't believe Jesus. We don't follow Jesus strictly enough to even be able to say that for real, Doc.
And so, well, and that becomes a whole nother story, right? And so, but but it starts with the fact that we don't understand that,
We do.
right? And since we don't understand that, we cut ourselves off from, a source of information. And so, um, and and I'm not, and again, I'm not saying you got to read the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I'm saying that he is a source. I am saying that there are these other sources that you can read and access to learn, more things that actually go into your process of stress inoculation. I am saying that. And then just to tie up a piece, so the HPA axis does not directly innervate um, with the prefrontal cortex, but there is it it connects to a range of systems in the brain stem structures that you know ultimately find their way into that space. But where we can ultimate where we have to be careful, well, not be careful, but what we also have to be aware of is that again in that fight or flight thing, when you start to think about, when your thoughts are dominated, by, you know, survival, and they're dominated by the threat. Um, it's called in some places they call it the hijacked amygdala. It interrupts the stream of information to the prefrontal cortex. And so there then starts to be a range of decisions that are being made, really more kind of based on memories and and not what the brain, not what the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex is actually reasoning and planning. And so it's more reactionary. And so we're more vulnerable to reactionary responses because the we can get overwhelmed with a threat, and so it's called a hijacked amygdala. And so the rethinking and reasoning is literally bypassed. Right now, if you are stuck in that, so that's what I'm asking you to do is to imagine being stuck in that and how unreasonable the day becomes.
Oof.
Like somebody is living that where they're not properly reasoning what's going on around them because they're stuck in, this survival space. And we've talked about that from time to time. And you can get stuck in this space. And we know that there are people who are stuck in this space. And so we need not ask why that person is making that kind of decision. The person is making that kind of decision because they are literally stuck. That's kind of what it means to be stuck in survival mode, right? They're doing what they believe they have to do in order to see the next moment, the next day, right? And so for us, since a disproportionate number of us are in that space. And this is another, argument that we have to get into the right order or not have it. So like it doesn't make sense for so we have a conversation about poverty and we be like, well, it's more of them impoverished than it is us. Yes, it is.
What that got to do with
Facts.
with us? You know,
But there's a disproportionate number of us relative to our larger number. who are in poverty versus that of white folks. And so what we need to be concerned about is that. And those folks have a living, they have a standard of living which is wreaking havoc, right? And so there's a group of us who use that other argument just as their distraction, not to attend to the needs of those who are in need the most that look like us, right? So they'll be like, there's more white folks in poverty than us, and then don't do nothing about people in poverty at all. Because there's more white folks, and so, but my whole point in bringing that up is that that person probably not concerned about politics. That person's probably not concerned, and therefore is probably not concerned about voting. That person is concerned about tomorrow,
Today,
right? They got to get this next minute right so that there can be a rest of the day.
that's
And if
correct.
they could get to the rest of the day, they think there's probably a good chance that there will be a tomorrow. And so that exists, right? But that's that that's the brain working in the context of the environment, of its environment. And so like we don't think like those of us who actually have time to contemplate this, we don't think it like that.
We do
We
not.
don't we,
And
you know,
we don't know that there's somebody at a gas pump right now with expired tags in St. Louis that is praying to God that their debit card is accepted so they can have enough so they can get their child to school tomorrow. We don't take that
yes,
into
we'll
contemplation.
take that. Yeah. It's
We do
like if
not.
you watch the movie that Tyler did with Taraji,
Right.
when she was the mother. Well, I don't recall the name of the movie.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah. Well,
but
I was about to give a shout out to Nate Parker. I saw Newborn over the weekend.
what's
He
the name of it?
Newborn.
Okay, I'll take a look at it. What it's about?
He did a phenomenal job dealing with mental health. And what he did outside of that, Doc, he put the system on trial and he didn't victim blame.
Okay. And so I'll take a
Then,
look at that.
on top of that, Doc, he showed the result of what proper care can look like,
What it can look like. And
what
that's
it
what
can look like. Oh, Doc, I thought about you in that movie. That is it was very disturbing. It was a movie. It was a movie.
the this all of this medical space can be very disturbing.
It is it
Once you
well, Doc,
but and it's the same in your space. It's
yeah,
like if you get in and you literally get to see the belly of the beast, this stuff is very disturbing. And back to like the miseducated Negro, you could end up in these spaces being treated by folks who look like you that treat you just like they treat you.
that is correct. Just like
It
we
ha
got people in the pulpit doing it this morning.
yes,
We got people in the law firm doing it. We got people in the hospital doing it. We
in
have
the
been
school doing it.
we
We
got
got and so
all the educators are come on,
and
man.
so and so the thing it just exists. But we have to understand the reason why it exists because this is where we are. And so most things are going to reflect this larger thing. And so that's another thing. That's just a point of reference that we just gotta kind of start with that also has its ability to kind of provide a measure of inoculation. And that is just accepting the reality, not 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 being content in it, but accepting that it is so
That
that you can
is so.
act accordingly.
So yes, so you can act accordingly. But yeah, we don't want to put the titles on ourselves, but it is what it is.
It is what it
It
is.
is what it is. Yeah, and some folks, as it relates to these things, need to be put in quarantine. So we got the inoculation for the system, and some people we need to put in
And
quarantine.
some people we need to put in quarantine. Absolutely.
And Doc, so let me tell you that I have suffered and experienced brain plasticity this morning because you didn't learn me some stuff again, and I
You did.
appreciate that, man. I appreciate it, and I hope the audience enjoys it. And we have we think we need to give you some time to go and ruminate and meditate. And after this, I think I'm going to go ahead and go to yoga instead
So
of going to the golf course.
right. And so that's a good piece. So like now I do my walk after we talk.
That's good.
Right. And so
Good.
I used to walk and then hop on with y'all, but now I do this. And then after we do this, I go do my walk. Right. And so it's to be out in nature, which could be meditative and it's in quiet, or sometimes I'm listening to a book. Um, but it's that get away from the other thing stuff, and it's good for the whole body. So just like yoga is good for the whole body. Yoga is a mind body type of thing. It's a mindfulness type of thing, and an intentional walk is a mindful type of thing as well. And so you cross a lot of boxes. You check a lot of boxes when you do a yoga, or when you walk, or if you just get you a mat and get in the middle of your bedroom or your living room, or if you ain't got a mat, because I don't want nobody not doing it because they ain't had no mat. You just gonna find a
You got a
safe place.
towel. You
Yes,
got a spot.
create
Grass.
a soft space for you to kind of, stretch, or for you to lay down and stare at the sky, or just close your eyes. All of those things are the beginning of, creating your spiritual and meditative space that helps to, regenerate the mind and the body, and also facilitates that pathway to um to the default mode network.
Doc,
So take care of yourself.
that is awesome. But this is the first year I have not worn my headbuds while I'm practicing and walking the golf course, for that very reason. And I can tell you it's a world of difference. Scores have, not gotten better just yet, but it's early in the season. I want to thank you, man, and we're going to wish you peace and blessings on your walk, and man, love and respect. We really, you blessed us today. Thank you so much, Doc. And we look forward to seeing you all again very soon on the level set. If it's God's will, we will be here next week.